page 506. In December 1974, the Congress passed a set of amendments to the Foreign Assistance Act. The amendments provided, inter alia, limitations on intelligence activities. A. No funds appropriated under authority of this or any other act may be expended by or on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency for operations in foreign countries, other than activities intended solely for the obtaining necessary intelligence, unless and until the President finds that each such operation is important to the national security of the United States and reports, in a timely fashion, a description and scope of such operation to the appropriate committees of Congress, including the Committee on Foreign Relations of the United States Senate and the Committee on Foreign Relations of the United States House of Representatives. B. The provision of subsection A of this section shall not apply during military operations initiated by the United States under a declaration of war approved by the Congress or an exercise of powers by the President under the War Powers Resolution. Footnote 113. Pausing the reading to read footnote 133. Reading footnote 133. Appendix D, Hearings, Volume 7, page 230. Resuming the reading. The statute does not explicitly authorize covert action by the Central Intelligence Agency. On its face, it leaves the question of congressional authorization for covert action by the intelligence agency in the same position as existed prior to its passage, with two exceptions. 1. For the first time, a statute passed by Congress and signed by the President acknowledges that the Central Intelligence Agency might, in fact, conduct operations which were not intended solely for intelligence gathering purposes. And 2. The statute required that if such operations were to be carried out, the President must first find that they are important to the national security of the United States. If such a finding is made, the operations must then be reported in a, quote, timely fashion, end quote, to the appropriate committees of Congress. Footnote 134. Pausing the reading to read footnote 134. There is some question as to the meaning of a, quote, timely fashion, end quote. It is not clear whether it means prior to, at the same time as, or within a reasonable time after the initiation of such an operation. The Central Intelligence Agency has, on occasion, notified the appropriate congressional committees before initiation of a project. The Senate Select Committee has recommended that the appropriate congressional committees be notified prior to the initiation of any significant covert action projects. Resuming the reading. The amendment does not, on its face, provide any new authority for the President or the CIA. Nowhere in the public record is there any suggestion that the amendment might, in itself, serve as a new delegation by Congress of authority to the President to order any action by the CIA. If the amendment were read as a new delegation of powers to the President, the delegation would cover an enormously wide range of activities. All those activities not intended solely for intelligence gathering. Footnote 135. Pausing the reading to read footnote 135. This would be limited, to some extent, by the requirement of a presidential finding. Resuming the reading. While there is no evidence in the public record that Congress intended to delegate new powers to the President or the CIA, it might. End of page 506, beginning page 507. Be argued that the passage of the amendment constitutes congressional acknowledgement that the CIA did have authority to conduct those covert actions consonant with the presidential finding. The CIA has, in fact, taken the position that passage of the amendment, quote, clearly implies that the CIA is authorized to plan and conduct covert action, end quote. Footnote 136. Pausing the reading to read footnote 136. Rogovin, HSIC, December 9, 75, page 1737. Resuming the reading. Two committees of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York concluded that passage of the amendment serves as a, quote, clear congressional authorization for the CIA to conduct covert activities, end quote. Footnote 137. This argument has considerable merit. Pausing the reading to read footnote 137. Quote, the Central Intelligence Agency, Oversight and Accountability, end quote, prepared by the Committee on Civil Rights and the Committee on International Human Relations of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, 1975, page 15. Resuming the reading. While certain restrictions were placed on the conduct of covert action, it was not prohibited as it might have been. The amendment was described in the floor debates as permitting the CIA to engage in many activities and, quote, authorizing, end quote, even covert activities, such as those designed to, quote, subvert or undermine foreign governments, end quote. Footnote 138. Pausing the reading to read footnote 138. Congressional Records, H11627, Daily Edition, December 11, 74. Remarks of Representative Holtzman. Resuming the reading. Congressional ratification or authorization, however, as demonstrated by the floor debates, was hardly unambiguous. A substantial number of the proponents of the amendment saw it as a temporary measure. As Senator Hughes, its sponsor, stated, the amendment I offer should be regarded as only a beginning toward the imperative of imposing some order and structure to the means by which the American people, through their elected representatives, can exercise a measure of control over the cloak and dagger operations of the intelligence agencies of the U.S. government. Footnote 139. He went on to say that the amendment, quote, provides a temporary arrangement, not a permanent one, recognizing that a permanent arrangement is in the process of being developed, end quote. Footnote 140. Pausing the reading to read footnote 139. Congressional Records, S18062, Daily Edition, October 2nd, 74. Remarks of Senator Hughes. Reading footnote 140. Ibid. Resuming the reading. The development of this, quote, permanent arrangement, end quote, depended on the effectiveness of the reporting requirement. Senator Baker, who had opposed the Aburez Amendment because there existed, quote, an insufficient state of information, end quote, by which to judge covert operations, and Senator Symington both described the Hughes Amendment as an important step in providing Congress with much needed information about the activities of the intelligence agencies. Footnote 141. Thus, the amendment might be seen not as congressional authorization for the CIA to conduct covert action, but as a temporary measure placing limits on what the CIA would do anyway, while at the same time requiring reporting to Congress so that Congress as a whole, traditionally deprived of knowledge about covert action, could determine what action to take with respect to this activity. Footnote 142. Pausing the reading to read footnote 141. Ibid, page PS18065. Remarks of Senator Baker and Senator Symington. Reading footnote 142. There is no evidence to support the view that Congress intended the amendment to serve as a post hoc ratification for all previous CIA activities, not intended solely for intelligence gathering. End of page 507, beginning page 508. Proponents of this interpretation of the amendment can argue that a measure designed to gather information about an activity cannot be construed as congressional ratification of that activity. If it were, Congress would be powerless to seek regular reports about a controversial subject on which it had been ill-informed, without such action being cited as congressional ratification for the subject of the reports. The amendment did not directly address the question of congressional authorization for the CIA to conduct covert action. Its passage did not unambiguously demonstrate a congressional intent to authorize covert action. However, its passage supports the position that Congress has either provided the CIA with implied authority or ratified whatever authority the CIA possessed. Congress clearly could have eliminated covert action. It chose instead to place certain limits on the CIA and to require reporting on covert actions to Congress. The reports to Congress should facilitate an informed legislative response to issues raised by covert action. They also have the effect of preventing Congress from plausibly denying its own knowledge of covert action by the United States if questions of congressional authorization of covert action arise in the future. Given the passage of the amendment and subsequent developments, particularly the hearings and reports of the House Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, there is little doubt that Congress is now on notice that the CIA claims to have the authority to conduct and does engage in covert action. Given that knowledge, congressional failure to prohibit covert action in the future can be interpreted as congressional authorization for it. Section F. Conclusion. There is no explicit statutory authority for the CIA to conduct covert action. There is no substantial evidence that Congress intended by the passage of the National Security Act of 1947 to authorize covert action by the CIA, or that Congress even anticipated that the CIA would engage in such activities. The legislative history of the CIA Act of 1949 similarly provides no indication of congressional intent to authorize covert action by the CIA. In 1974, the 1974 amendment to the Foreign Assistance Act recognizes that the CIA does engage in activities other than those solely for the purpose of intelligence gathering, i.e., covert action. Enacted following disclosures of CIA covert action in Chile, the amendment does provide support to the argument that Congress has authorized covert action by the agency or has ratified the agency's authority. One of the purposes of the amendment, however, was to assure Congress the information about covert action necessary to decide what to do about it. Additional support for the argument that Congress has ratified the CIA's authority to conduct covert action would be provided by the continuing provision of funds to the CIA when it is clear that such funds will be used in part for covert action. Some support for the position may also be found in the continuing acquiescence of Congress in the executive branch's claim that court action has congressional authorization. While neither ratification by appropriation nor ratification by acquiescence are favored by the courts, they cannot be disregarded. End of page 508, beginning page 509. In the past, such claims were weak. A few individual members of Congress were kept informed about covert action, but there were doubts about the knowledge of Congress as a whole. The claims are now more powerful because of the notoriety of the executive branch's claim of authorization by Congress, and because Congress, in the part due to the reports required since 1974 and House and Senate investigations, can no longer claim ignorance of covert action. Given the present state of congressional knowledge, any remaining ambiguity will be resolved, whether Congress acts directly or not. Views of the inherent power of the President and the rightful role for Congress in the formulation, initiation, and review of U.S. actions abroad have changed since the establishment of the CIA and the enactment of the National Security Act of 1947. These changes are reflected in such legislation as the 1974 Amendment to the Foreign Assistance Act. Whatever role evolves for the Congress in the future, it must now take responsibility for the CIA's conduct of covert action and for its results. End of page 509. Beginning page 510. Page 510. Appendix 2. Additional covert action recommendations. Throughout its inquiry, the committee received numerous recommendations concerning covert action from many individuals and groups, including A. Clark Clifford, former counsel to President Truman, former member and chairman of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, former Secretary of Defense. B. Cyrus Vance, former General Counsel, Department of Defense, former Secretary of the Army, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, former Special Representative of the President, former member of U.S. delegation to Paris peace negotiations. C. Morton Halperin, Director, Project on National Security and Civil Liberties, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Affairs, former Assistant for Planning, National Security Council Staff, former Senior Fellow, Brookings Institution. D. David Phillips, former Central Intelligence Agency employee, President, Association of Retired Intelligence Officers. E. Harvard University Institute of Politics, Study Group on Intelligence Activities. This group was established in September 1975 on the basis of an understanding between the Institute of Politics and the staff of the Select Committee to examine aspects of the national intelligence community's mission and structure. Its endeavor was an entirely voluntary one, with neither party having any former obligations to the other. The group met approximately 11 times between October 1975 and January 1976, and included Graham Allison, Philip Arita, Francis Bator, Robert Bowie, John Bross, Morton Halperin, Philip Heyman, Ernest May, Jonathan Moore, Robert Pursley, Walter Slocombe, J. T. Smith, and Franklin Lindsay. F. The House Select Committee on Intelligence Activities. G. The Commission on the Organization of the Government for the Conduct of Foreign Policy, the Murphy Commission. The committee also considered suggestions made in numerous journal and magazine articles. Selected statements, suggestions, and recommendations from these sources follow. End of page 510, beginning page 511. Clifford, I welcome your invitation to appear here today to discuss with your committee the problems surrounding the conduct of covert activities. The public has given much attention to this subject, and a national dialogue has ensued. Some contend that it is necessary in the preservation of our democratic form of government to have a full disclosure of operations in this delicate area to ascertain if abuses have occurred. Others contend, with equal sincerity, that such an inquiry damages our country's image in the world and adversely affects the ability of our intelligence services to perform their tasks. It is my opinion that the inquiry being conducted by this committee became absolutely necessary as the result of certain disclosures which demonstrated that gross abuses had occurred. Our country may sustain some temporary reduction in the effectiveness of its intelligence operations, but I may consider this temporary in nature and an appropriate price to pay in presenting the facts to the American people and in making progress toward the goal of preventing repetition of such abuses in the future. With the right kind of machinery, our country can take those actions which it believes necessary to help maintain freedom in the world and, at the same time, avoid the opprobrium that has been directed toward us as the result of improper activities in the field of clandestine and covert operations. In 1946, President Truman stated that we must have a formalized intelligence agency The lessons learned as a result of Pearl Harbor and increased tensions following World War II convinced him that we needed an institutionalized peacetime intelligence agency. As a result, the Central Intelligence Agency was created in the National Security Act of 1947. Footnote 1. Pausing the reading to read footnote 1. Appendix B, Hearing, Volume 7, page 210. Resuming the reading. Because those of us who were assigned to this task and had the drafting responsibility were dealing with a new subject with practically no precedents, it was decided that the act creating the Central Intelligence Agency should contain a quote catch-all end quote clause to provide for unforeseen contingencies. Thus it was written that the CIA should quote perform such other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the National Security Council may from time to time direct, end quote. It was under this clause that early in the operation of the 1947 Act, covert activities were authorized. I recall that such activities took place in 1948, and it is even possible that some planning took place in late 1947. It was the original concept that covert activities undertaken under the Act were to be carefully limited and controlled. You will note that the language of the Act provides that this catch-all clause is applicable only in the event that the national security is affected. This was considered to be an important limiting and restricting clause. End of page 511, beginning page 512. However, as the Cold War continued and communist aggression became the major problem of the day, our government felt that it was necessary to increase our country's responsibilities in protecting freedom in various parts of the world. It seems apparent now that we also greatly increased our covert activities. I have read somewhere that as time progressed, we had literally hundreds of such operations going on simultaneously. It seems clear that these operations have gotten out of hand. The knowledge regarding such operations has become so widespread that our country has been accused of being responsible for practically every internal difficulty that has occurred in every country in the world. Our reputation has been damaged, and our capacity for ethical and moral world leadership has been impaired. The need to correct this unfortunate development is long past due. As one attempts to analyze the difficulty and hopefully offer constructive suggestions for improvement, he finds much confusion existing within the system. It is clear that lines of authority and responsibility have become blurred and indistinct. The National Security Council, under the Act of 1947, is given the responsibility of directing our country's intelligence activities. My experience leads me to believe that this function has not been effectively performed. The members of the NSC already have full-time jobs and do not have the time to oversee meticulously the actions of the intelligence community. Even though special committees have been set up from time to time to perform this task, we learn that many covert activities are undertaken without the knowledge of the National Security Council or its special committee. In the staff report on covert action in Chile, footnote 2, the startling statement is made that only 1/4 of all covert action projects are considered by the 40 Committee. Pausing the reading to read footnote 2. Appendix A Hearings, Volume 7, page 144. Resuming the reading. Another condition exists that helps explain the unfortunate predicament in which we find ourselves. I believe on a number of occasions a plan for covert action has been presented to the NSC, and authority is requested for the CIA to proceed from point A to point B. The authority will be given and the action will be launched. When point B is reached, the persons in charge feel that it is necessary to go out to point C, and they assume that the original authorization gives them such a right. From point C, they go to D and possibly E, and even further. This has led to some bizarre results, and when an investigation is started, the excuse is blandly presented that authority was obtained from the NSC before the project was launched. I believe that the present system is no longer adequate to meet the task. The lack of proper controls has resulted in a freewheeling course of conduct on the part of persons with the intelligence community, within the intelligence community, that has led to spectacular failures and much unfortunate publicity. A new approach is obviously needed, for it is unthinkable that we can continue to commit the egregious errors that have caused such consternation to our friends and such delight to our enemies. This inquiry today is part of the broad investigation conducted by this committee to ascertain the facts. This is a preliminary phase which hopefully will lead to recommendations that will help eliminate, end of page 512, beginning page 513, the errors of the past and provide the country with the expectation that we can operate successfully in the future in this sensitive area with dignity and effectiveness. I know that this committee will be considering the means by which we can attain the improvement that is so necessary and is so desired by our people. In this connection, permit me to present to the committee a brief 5-point plan that I believe would make progress toward achieving our goal. First, the 1947 law creating the CIA should be substantially amended, and a new law should be written covering intelligence functions. We have had almost 30 years of experience under the old law and have learned a great deal. I believe it has served us reasonably well, but its defects have become increasingly apparent. A clearer, more definitive bill can be prepared that can accomplish our purposes. By creating clearer lines of authority and responsibility, and by carefully restricting certain activities, we can hopefully prevent the abuses of the past. Second, the creation of an effective joint House-Senate committee to oversee intelligence operations. I consider this the most important function of a new law. Proper congressional oversight has been sadly lacking. I would hope that a small oversight committee of possibly 5 members of each chamber might be created. It should be considered an assignment of outstanding importance, and the members should be willing to give the necessary time to do it. By keeping the committee small, security can be maintained and the possibility of disclosures can be minimized. With reference to covert activities, I believe it would be appropriate for this committee to be informed in advance by the executive branch of the government before a covert project is launched. The committee should be briefed, and, if it approves, then the activity can go forward. If the committee disapproves, it should inform the president of its disapproval so that he will have the benefit of the joint committee's reaction. If necessary, the president and the committee can confer, after which the president may decide to abandon the project or possibly modify it. If he permits in going ahead despite the committee's disapproval, then the committee might choose to withhold funds necessary to finance the activity in question. It is my feeling that the importance of the decision-making process in this very delicate field is such that there should be a joint effort by the executive and legislative branches. I would assume that this committee will have questions in that regard, and I'm sure it will be valuable for us to discuss it. Third, a new position of Director General of Intelligence should be created. This man would be the Chief Intelligence Officer of the United States. It would be his responsibility to correlate and synchronize the activities of the various agencies within the intelligence community. Under this concept, there would still be a director of the community. Excuse me. Under this concept, there would still be a director of the CIA, but his duties would be confined to the day-by-day operations of that agency. The Director General would be responsible for the product that would be produced by the intelligence community, and he would be the chief advisor to the President on intelligence matters. End of page 513, beginning page 514. The Director General would also be charged with the duty of seeing that the various agencies operated effectively and complied with the law. In this connection, he would have under him a number of inspectors who would assist him in carrying out this function. Fourth, the decision regarding the undertaking of covert projects should be made by the Director General of Intelligence and the National Security Council, and he would have the responsibility of seeing that such covert projects were properly carried out by the CIA and other members of the intelligence community. In the beginning, there was a separation between the CIA and the group charged with covert activities. In the early 1950s, they were consolidated. I believe that there should be much stricter control over the launching of covert projects, but that after the basic decision is made, then all the assets possessed by the CIA and other agencies should be utilized. The close supervision provided for in this concept will inescapably diminish the number of covert operations. In my opinion, this is a highly desirable result. Many of the plans launched in the past should have been vetoed at their inception. I am sure that decisions have been made in the field that never would have been made in higher levels of our government. The guiding criterion should be the test as to whether or not a certain covert project truly affects our national security. Fifth, the new intelligence agency should be forbidden to undertake any domestic operations except to police its own employees. There should not be any type of catch-all provision in the new law which would permit the intelligence agency to spy on American citizens. All domestic operations of this nature should be handled by the FBI. It is equipped to do it, and a close cooperation between the CIA and the FBI is desirable and necessary. Certainly, one agency charged with the responsibility of domestic surveillance activities is enough. We have a big job to do in this country. Our people are confused about our national goals and cynical about our institutions. Our national spirit seems to have been replaced by a national malaise. It is my conviction that the efforts of this committee will assist us in regaining confidence in our national integrity and in helping to restore to our nation its reputation in the world for decency, fair dealing, and moral leadership. End of page 514, beginning page 515. Section B. Statement of Cyrus Vance. Mr. Vance, I would like to speak briefly to what I believe is the central thrust of this committee's investigation. Should there be any covert action? If so, what kinds and under what restraints? At the outset, I think it is important to underscore the distinction between covert collection of intelligence and covert actions other than collection. I believe that with respect to covert collection of intelligence, the continuation of such collection should be permitted as I believe it is essential to the national security. With respect to covert actions, I would not recommend that all covert actions be prohibited by law. I believe it is too difficult to see that clearly into the future. I believe it would be wise to enact legislation prohibiting involvement in assassinations, as has been suggested by this committee. In addition, I would be in favor of legislation prohibiting interference with the electoral processes in other countries. I would note that the drafting of such legislation is a complex business, and it would have to be so drafted as not to block covert intelligence collection. Now, with respect to other covert actions, I believe it should be the policy of the United States to engage in covert actions only when they are absolutely essential to the national security. The statutes, as now drafted, use the words, quote, affect, end quote, or, quote, are important to, end quote, footnote 3. Pausing the reading to read footnote 3. Appendix B Hearings, Volume 7, page 210. Resuming the reading. I think those words are inadequate. I think covert actions should be authorized only when they are essential to the national security. Under such a test, I believe that the number of covert actions would be very, very small. As to procedures to ensure that such a policy would be carried out, I would suggest the following, and in the connection I might note that I agree with most of the recommendations that Mr. Clifford has made. First, I believe that any proposal for a covert action should first go to the National Security Council, not a sub-cabinet level committee. The highest level of the government should focus upon the question, and therefore it should go before the National Security Council. I would further suggest that the Attorney General of the United States be made a member of the National Security Council. This would ensure that the Chief Legal Officer of the United States would be one of those who would be passing upon the recommendation that goes to the President if it is in the affirmative. I would also recommend that the President be required to give his approval in writing, certifying that he believes the proposed action is essential to the national security. After the President's approval, I would suggest that a full and complete description of the proposed action be communicated immediately to a joint Congressional Oversight Committee, along the lines which Mr. Clifford has suggested. I believe that such a step would then put the committee or any of its members, end of page 515, beginning page 516, in a position to express their disapproval or concerns about the proposed action and to communicate them to the President of the United States. I am not suggesting that the committee should have a veto. I do not believe that is necessary. I am suggesting that the committee or its individual members would be able to communicate with the President, thus giving him the benefit of the committee's advice or of the advice of individual members. I believe this is and would be the important to the President's. I believe this is and would be important to presidents. I do not believe there would be inevitable leaks from such committees. I know that the Congress can safeguard security matters which are essential to our national security. Finally, I believe it's necessary that a monitoring system be set up which would require frequent reports. I would suggest at least monthly to the highest level, namely the National Security Council and the Congress, and to the Joint Oversight Committee as to the progress of any action which has been authorized to go forward. I think this would tend to help in meeting the problem that Mr. Clifford suggested with respect to a covert operation moving from A to B and then from B to C and so on. Again, Mr. Chairman, I would stress that I believe such actions should and would be very rare, and that under such a set of procedures, there would be adequate oversight to control such activities. End of page 516, beginning page 517. Section C. Statement of David A. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, Mr. Chairman and Senators, for the record, I would like to make it clear that any viewpoints that I express today are personal ones. They do not represent the Association of Retired Intelligence Officers, an organization of intelligence people from all services of which I happen to be president. I would like to discuss covert action and covert activity. There is nothing new about covert action. The term, which describes a variety of hugger-mugger gambits which can be taken in to influence another nation's actions, attitudes, or public opinion. What is new is the current controversy as to whether our country should engage in covert action. This is a valid subject for debate. Even though covert operations have been drastically reduced, American intelligence personnel realize that many of the problems which beset the intelligence community result from historical slips on the banana peels of covert action. The biggest banana peel of all is that vague phrase in the charter of CIA, which reads, quote, "and other such functions and duties," end quote, an ambiguous instruction which should be omitted from future legislation. There are two dimensions to covert operations. The first is the major political or paramilitary endeavor, such as an attempt to change a government, Guatemala for instance, or to finance a secret army in Southeast Asia. You might call this covert action with a capital "C" capital "A" king size. There is a second level of covert action in the lowercase covert action with a small c, small a. I call this covert activity, quote unquote. Little money, sometimes none, is spent on covert activity, where cooperative friends are persuaded to influence a foreign government or some element of it. The friend might be a government official responsive to an ambassador's off-the-record request that the local government tighten up its laws concerning illegal narcotics traffic to the United States. When the friend is met clandestinely by CIA, he is called an "agent of influence." He might be a radio commentator or a local Bernard Baruch whose park bench opinions carry political weight. The agent of influence might be the foreign minister's mistress. Most covert activities utilizing the agent of influence are useful to American ambassadors in achieving low-key but important objectives of U.S. foreign policy. These activities are known in intelligence jargon as "motherhood," and revelations concerning them would not shock or disturb the American public. To proscribe CIA operations in covert activities would be imprudent. Covert action, capital C, capital A, is another matter. In 25 years as a practitioner of covert action and covert activity in 7 countries, I have found that most of our mistakes occur when we attempt to persuade foreigners to do something which the United States wants more than they do. The most successful operations have been those in which we were requested to intervene. The percentage of such operations. When a foreign, end of page 517, beginning page 518. Foreign leader has asked for secret assistance has been quite high. Some aspects of covert operations are anachronistic. Dirty tricks, such as besmirching the reputation of an individual, have been abandoned and should not be revived. This expensive accessories of covert action in the past, such as airlines and paramilitary units, should not and need not be maintained as secret capabilities. There is a basic question to be answered. Given the distemper given given the distemper of the times and the lack of credibility in government following Watergate, can covert operations remain covert? If not, they should be terminated. Macy's window is not the place for secret operation. Some sort of compromise seems to be in order. If American intelligence operators demand secrecy as essential in covert operations, executive and congressional overseers have the even more important duty of knowing what intelligence agencies are doing. I am convinced that the CIA is the organization best suited to carry out covert action operations. Despite this, I have reluctantly come to the conclusion that the charter for covert action should rest elsewhere. I say this more in sorrow than anything else. Effective and responsible accountability override practical operational considerations. This will be best achieved in the conduct of covert action by the creation of a new very small bureau or office. By statute, this organization would be staffed by no more than 100 persons. Some 60 would be in a support role. Perhaps 40 officers would be engaged in the planning for and, on request, the execution of covert action operations. All U.S. covert action eggs, then, would be in one small basket, a basket which could be watched very carefully. Even if not utilized, such an office would be justifiable in terms of money and effort as a war plans unit, expendable in case of international conflict. A joint congressional committee should find such an easy unit to monitor, and the intelligence personnel working in it could then expect a reduced number of congressional overseers as opposed to the 6 committees now observing covert operations. The office I propose would call on expertise derived from experience. It would not employ airlines or mercenaries or exotic paraphernalia, but would need the capability to provide friends with imaginative advice and what British intelligence officers have sometimes called, quote, King George's cavalry, end quote, money. Covert action is a stimulating business, a heady experience for those who sponsor it and for its practitioners. If not used in moderation, it is as dangerous as any stimulant. But to suggest that covert action be abandoned as a political option in the future is, in my opinion, injudicious, if not frivolous. Some say that covert action should be abolished because of past mistakes. This would be as foolish as abolishing the office of the president because it has been abused once, or to disband our army in peacetime would be. The committee is aware of the 2-year study recently conducted by the Murphy Commission, footnote 4. A conclusion of this review that covert action should not be abandoned but should be employed only where such action is clearly essential to vital U.S. purposes, and then only after careful high-level review. Reading footnote 4. Report of the Commission on the Organization of the Government for the Conduct of Foreign Policy, June 1975.